Hello, and welcome to the CropScan Ag Engage data training. We welcome you back here to really take this opportunity to start going through our harvest data. Obviously, CropScan Ag is heavily involved in harvest data collection, but we want to make sure that you're taking your data to the next step and be able to use your harvest data for subsequent seasons and really start to join the dots on going from harvest through to improve crop management, utilizing the data and finding out some key learnings from last year's harvest and taking that through to take your cropping system to the next level by utilizing the data and applying that through to the next season. So today we're going to run through a little bit about what the CropScan Ag data flow is and how that connects through to Engage and what it means to have that data all connected. So to go back to the start, we've got two modules in Engage. So we've got the Engage Harvest Manager. So for all systems that have been purchased over the last 12 months or so, Harvest Manager is now a standard feature for a 12-month license for the CropScan 3300H and a 5-year license for the CropScan 4000 VT. So obviously, the CropScan 4000 VT doesn't have the in-cab display, the separate PC display. It all runs through the virtual terminal. So to bring all the grain logistics that we know and love off the 3300 to the 4000 VT users, the Engage app allows all that grain logistics and data management to occur from there. So on the Harvest Manager, obviously we've got the virtual farm storage. So that's linking that data flow from the combine through the grain cuts, trucks, and bins. So manage all that storage, all that grain inventory management. It's where we can work out those transfers and blending loads. It's not only the harvester driver who now has access to that. Anyone who's shared into this account can start managing that grain inventory. You've also got the option in the Harvest Manager for view only of the protein, oil, moisture, and yield maps. So all that data is coming in, but it'll just be the view only of those maps. We've then got the Engage Nutrient Manager module, which has all of the features of the Engage Harvest Manager, but also unlocks the power of the mapping and the analytics side of things. So no CropScan system comes with Nutrient Manager as standard. So this is an opt-in subscription for Nutrient Manager for the data management side of things to go on to that prescription creation. So in here, we can do the yield and protein field performance analytics, create those zone maps of the protein maps, the yield, and also those field performance zones, and turn them into a prescription map. Once those maps are created, we can then export them back to your machinery platform, such as CNH Field Ops or John Deere Operations Center, and also have that shape file there, which can go to another system. So go to your Marshall IM4 software or alike. We can also step through doing the soil test sites, work out where we need to be allocating some soil zones to. We can't ingest the soil data just yet, but we've got the option there for navigating to those sites, and then many agronomists or farmers will have their own software for that soil test data management, so that can correlate with that information. Track some notes in there as well. Drop pins. Is there a rock pile? Has that zone been frosted, for example? And also run the reporting function. So you'll have the reports of the harvest summaries of yield, protein, total tonnages, the fertilizer. So once you create the prescriptions, it creates a tally of those average field rates and total tons required, and also those field performance reports. So there's high yield, low protein, low yield, high protein zones, how much of the fields, what percentage of those fields are in those different zones. Like I said, this Nutrient Manager module is a opt-in subscription, and the licenses are required to unlock the access to this data flow. So when you start downloading Engage, this will be generally the first screen that you'll be greeted with, which is opting for a initial 7-day trial for either Grain Logistics, the Harvest Manager side of things, or the Nutrient Manager. So the licenses are a key requirement to actually get that data to start to really step into the database. So we'll be collecting data, storing it in the cloud, which we'll go into, and that's essentially like a cloud server that's available to all CropScan users. But to actually kick that data into the database for you to be able to start actioning that information, we need to have a license activated. So Nutrient Manager license is available through your dealer, or contact us to activate. And critically, just some of the key tips on this is we've had some growers activate mid-season or post-harvest. Once that happens, I would say all that data is sitting in the cloud. And once we activate a license, we just then need to reprocess that data that's sitting in the cloud, which will then force the data to be ingested onto the Engage side of the system. So to help that make sense, it helps to put it into a bit of a diagram. So basically, when we're collecting data on the combine, it's all that data has been stored in the either in-cab display for the 3300 H systems, or on the 4000s stored in the spectrometer box mounted outside the cab. So we're always collecting that native data. We then if you've got a CropScan Ag cloud account and it's connected, logged in on your in-cab display or on the 4000 system, which it needs to be, all that data will be funneled straight to the cloud and stored and essentially run as a live backup as that data has been sent to the cloud. That is a free service that's always available to you to access that data. Then that data that's stored in the cloud, we can also, if you haven't got the cellular connectivity over or Wi-Fi over Harvest, we can do a manual upload of that, which we'll show you shortly, to push that data straight to the cloud. Once that data is in the cloud, we can then have access to that in the Engage app. So Engage is talking to the CropScan Ag cloud to pull that data round and view it in Engage, which is then the Grain Logistics and the Nutrient Manager. So both of those licenses will then be pulling that data out of the cloud. And again, like I say, if you're not seeing all your data in there, it's potentially your license might have been activated after you've already started collecting some data, which may just take a reprocess step and then it will appear. From there, we can create the prescriptions, send it back to Machinery Portal and bring that through to apply to your next crop. And then we close that loop when we go around to harvest again. So it's a really important step to understand that data flow. And then we can help troubleshoot if you have got any issues with data appearing on where the system may need to be essentially kicked into gear to either reprocess or find where that data is sitting. So critically on the CropScan Ag cloud, many of you would have created accounts at app.cropscanag.com. And this is essentially the setup where we've got that raw data sitting in these folders. So essentially like a Dropbox account, just a cloud server account where that data's all been stored. Again, that's free to access. Anyone can create an account. And if you want to share your data to anyone, all they'll need, and partner in Engage, they'll need a CropScan Ag cloud account as well, which activates them as a user. They won't also need a license. They can piggyback off yours if they just need to view your data. But this is the account system that we will need set up. So this is where we create those portal connections, and many of you who are already set up, you've either created a CNH Field Ops connection, API connection, or the John Deere Operations Center connection. We do rely on those systems to bring in the field boundaries. And this has gone back to some of our previous training, which some of you might have been on, where we want to start getting robust around managing that digital farm and having that master digital farm and making sure that's always correct, because that ensures the data flow runs smoothly from there on. So we do have some previous training videos run by Ian Beecher-Jones around some of that data hygiene and managing that data flow from grower farm field and making sure that's all coming through. So we don't ask you to recreate boundaries. We want to use ones that are already existing. So we'll now step into some of the demo side of things, going from the CropScan Ag Cloud portal. Through today's presentation, we are going to assume a lot of the API connections are done. So if yours isn't set, and I'll show you how to identify if it is or isn't set up, we can help you through that with some other training videos later. Work through some of that data import and sync, because it has been a big feedback to us over this webinar, is to just getting the concept of that data import, export, going from the in-cab display to the cloud and the like, and that data reprocessing step. We'll then go into Engage for just some basic navigation. There are some other training videos out there as well, but step through getting you to feel comfortable with working through that. And really, we're not expecting everyone to go and create maps left, right, and center. What we typically see is in that first year, picking 3 to 5 fields that you really have good data on, that you've got confidence to go to that next step on, and work through that journey from there. So just to wind it back, for those of you who are running the 3300 or the 3000 even, is the data export from the in-cab display. So in options, then data transfer, you'll then be greeted with all the export options, import and export options off your in-cab display. So there are different challenges with connectivity this season. So we're navigating through some of those challenges with the growers on that data export via cellular or Wi-Fi, but there's always that export via USB as that option. So if you have the USB in the side of the screen, do try and use the one that was provided in the kit. Some USBs don't play as nicely. They try and be a different file driver in the computer. So utilize one that's there, run the export, select the year, and then we can go from there. Once we have that, we can then go to the CropScan Ag Cloud portal. So that is available at app.cropscanag.com. So you'll just log in to the screen, and then you'll be greeted with the different files from the different years that have been created. So every harvest year, we'll create a new folder in the CropScan Ag display in cab, as well as then when it syncs to the cloud, it's all organized in folder format. In there, you'll find your protein and yield files, and if you've loaded up. So you can, for the ones who have got either a CAN bus system on the CNH machines or have already uploaded data, you'll have a yield folder as well as that protein. Over on the top right here, we've got the import and sync function. So that import and sync allows us to bring in any historical CropScan data, and also create, this is where we'll step through the API connections as well. So if you have your CropScan data that have been exported to a USB, this is where you'll come to bring it into the system. So all you'll do is come in here, select the year, so say 2024 harvest, select map CSV, and this is where when you do export your data, you'll see there'll be a number of file types for each field, which one of them will end in -map, and they're the files you want to bring in. Then you import CropScan data. You'll select your USB if you've got that. If not, we can select the protein data that we've got there. Go open. That'll upload here, and then we go upload all. And that will bring that data into the CropScan Ag Cloud, which will then start that loading. So once that triggers, that's ingesting that into our CropScan servers. And then, like I say, if you've got the license activated, it'll then start loading that data into the database as well. While we're in here, this is the tabs where we want to be connecting your API connections. So this one has been connected with a CNH FieldOps account. So this where you just toggle this on and then follow the prompts, and there are some other videos for that. And for importing yield, this is the same tab you'll come into. So have your CN1s with your yield data and select your year again. And then you can import your CN1s if you're running a CNH system. For John Deere, same process. So we've got the John Deere API. At the moment, like, we do deal with a number of mixed fleets as well. So in time, we'll be able to have dual APIs. So you could compare with Field Ops as well as Operations Center, but currently we can only sync with one. So do think about that. Quite often it is most logical on this data flow to sync with the platform that you'll use mostly when you're doing your in-crop applications. So yeah, think about that. We can have a discussion. No worries with having a query on that. I'm asking which system would be best for you to set up based on where you've got data flowing from harvest versus in-crop. So same thing with the John Deere. There's some training videos on it as well, but toggle that on and follow the prompts for turning that on. You can then import the AB lines when you're exporting them from Operations Center, and also your yield will all come in as shape files. So follow the export pathways for yield data out of Operations Center, and then we can again select the year, upload the shape files from John Deere, and then that'll get unpacked there as well. Once that data's come in, we can go back to the files, and this is where we'll have the protein and yield data sitting. If we come in here, we'll see a list of the data that you've got stored. If you end up opening up Engage and don't see any of your data appearing, we may need to be reprocessing. And when we say reprocess, all we're asking you to do, if it's all your data or some of your data, you can either select individual files, just tick the box, or we can collectively tick all your protein data, which is all packaged up in this protein-map zip file, and then go reprocess over here. That reprocess will then re-ingest all that data into the database. It does take a little bit of time to process, so it won't immediately appear in Engage, but that's the steps you followed to kick some of that data in. So if you see half of your data in there, the other half is missing, I'd come back into the CropScan Ag Cloud, select the fields that are missing, and then go reprocess. If you are wanting to use your data in another software system, that's totally fine. And this is the file types that we want you to be exporting. So we want everyone to be able to use the data on whatever system they want. So if you're running SMS or FarmWorks on your desktop, these are the file types you can export. So just select your protein-map and then select export, and that will then download a zip folder with all of your data coming down into that. So some of these videos are all available. We'll have some links towards the end that are available on our YouTube, Vimeo, and also on our website, which is on the resources tab and training videos. So we've got a number of videos there for you to utilize. So CropScan Ag Cloud is where the data is essentially housed. So if we're doing anything with the raw data file type management, that's where we'll tell you to go to the CropScan Ag Cloud portal, and then we interface with that data in Engage. So if that gives you a bit of a background on that. And then just out of interest's sake, when you do create new prescriptions, they'll obviously trigger into that subsequent year, which will then be sitting in a folder called management zones. And they'll be there as shape files, which you can just export as well in that same process of exporting through there. So that's a snapshot of the CropScan Ag Cloud portal. I'll now kick across to Engage to run you through some of the steps to start utilizing your data on that side of it. Should be coming up. Okay, so when you open up Engage, you'll be prompted with a bit of a login. And quite often when growers will initially get set up, if we haven't done all the steps, especially connecting that API account, we may be greeted with a spatial map that drops you in a more densely populated area than your farm might be. If that's the case, this is a default view of where your boundaries haven't come across into Engage, which if you get in contact with us, this is where we'll tell you to go back to the CropScan Ag Cloud portal and connect that API to either the Field Ops or Operations Center accounts. Once we're in here, the little man, as we navigate through here, up in the top right, the little man is telling you about your account and other, this is where you toggle between Grain Logistics or the Harvest Manager and also Nutrient Manager, and also other organizations that you're paired with or have synced up if you've got multiple farms. And this is where if some people have some shadow data where they've tried to set up an operations center or field ops account multiple times under the same login, had multiple goes, we'll quite often see a number of farms populate in here and you've just got to hunt out which is the right one. So we do recommend before you do this API connection, you have that tidy up of your field ops or operations center account to get that before we get that data flowing. As a general navigation, we've then got the settings cog in the top right-hand corner, and this is where it tells you a little bit about your account. We can also add other users here. So if you want to be adding your agronomist in, other workers on the farm, whoever you want access to, either if it's the harvest manager to be able to manage those transactions and blending, it might be the truck driver or whatever, they can be added in here, and having a number of people are adding their agronomist and that sort of thing from here as well, and they'll get view and field management rights to your data, but it all links back to still your API. So you're still the master of the account, but they'll have access and can create prescriptions if you want them to view and access that as well. On the left-hand side, this is where we can step down. The storage locations is more geared and contracts is geared towards the harvest manager side of it. Then we step down to the nutrient manager tabs, which is legends. This is where we can do bulk editing of some of the legends. If you know it's been a dry year and all your yields are going to be lower for argument's sake, or protein's going to be higher, we can come in here and set up some different legends. But they're default legends set up for you to get going in that. We'll then critical step before we go down the prescription creation is, especially while we're trying to pair everything up, is make sure we've got the products loaded in. So if you're using lime, urea, gypsum, MAP, we can just come in here, hit add, name it, tell if it's granular or liquid, and then save. And that'll build this library of products in here, which is an important step because we can't create a management zone and onto prescription without these products set up initially. We can't reverse add them. We've got to do this step first. Then we can also add implements, which say if it's a spreader, set the width of 36 meters, or you might have a seeder and identify it as a seeder, and it might be 12 meters. What that defines then is the grid sizing that will be made if we're doing a grid-based map, which will then define where the changes of the rates will be occurring and alike. We've also got display preferences. This is where we can toggle on field names, legends, metric and imperial for those of us joining from in the North Americas, and also for a bit of fun can change your combine harvester color around as well. So that's just sort of at the back end of just some of those settings, but important to get that right. Poke along and get those all loaded to get that data flow all started to be set up before you go down the prescription map creation. So make sure you do your products and your implements critically, because that is the base foundation for creating the management zones. So I'll now swap into another shared account. and which will then bring up some boundaries that are all shared. So when we see this view, we see some blue and red boundaries. If we see blue boundaries, it means we've got zero data in those boundaries at all. So that could be a quick snapshot query of, okay, what's going on in this field? Why don't we have data there? Do we need to reprocess, or has it not had a crop in it that we've been able to collect data from? The red boundaries mean that we've got data in them. So as we navigate through, you can select a field. What I'll do just for in the bottom right here, we've got a filter. And typically when you're setting up an account, we'll see less layers than what I've got in here. So I'll just show you what the typical starting view would be. If we've loaded yield and protein in, we'll have protein, moisture, oil, and elevation usually comes with the yield, and which will then simplify this bottom string here. Any of the layers that are sitting in this bottom tray can be utilized to be able to make a prescription. So whatever's in here, can be utilized to build the framework for some of that prescription creation. So have protein, yield, they're the two obviously most common ones that growers are utilizing for their prescription creation. And then we'll also have, say, a moisture map and elevation, which, like I say, come in out of the yield data. So again, depending on how that data is laid out, we can change the legends and work from there. As a bit of base navigation, we've got a few buttons that are around the screen. So we've got the plus button. Plus button's where all the creation starts happening for prescriptions. So we've got to remember the plus button. If you don't see the plus button at all, that means you've still got the Harvest Manager subscription, and you need to be upgraded to the Nutrient Manager subscription to get the plus button for the prescription creation. Otherwise, you'll still be able to view all these maps in the Harvest Manager view, but you won't be able to create the prescription. We've then got refresh. So refresh is there to, once we've started stepping through either loading data into the cloud or making some adjustments here on the screen, we can use that refresh button to kick it along. We've then got this target button. This is for tracking where you are relative to the field. So this will be geolocating for you, which is really handy when we start trying to soil sample in different zones in the field. We can have this app open, drop some pins, which I'll show you, and navigate to these different zones, because that becomes a really important step to how we're going to utilize this data, is making sure we're starting to get more information on why we've got these different zones in the field. And then, like I touched on, we've got the filter down in the bottom right, which we can turn different fields and farms and layers on as required. In the top left, we've got the magnifying glass. So the magnifying glass we'll go into shortly, but that's where the field analytics is generated. We've then got the page. The corner folded over is the report section. So in reports, we'll give you a summary of all your field harvest results. You can filter it for grains and the year, and just hone in on how they've gone, and look at the protein, moisture, oil, yield, and alike. Across the top here, we can also navigate through there with the fertilizer. So once we've created prescriptions, this will give us a summary of the fertilizers required in each field, and also totals at the end. Once we create some field performance maps, which is those yield by protein layered maps, we can then get a summary section here of that blue zone, which is the moisture limited zone, so the higher protein, lower yield, the green zone, the yellow zone, and the red zone, and see what the spread is of that. We can also get the summary area of the notes section and any soil test pins we've dropped, which I'll show you now, which is the notes. So next to that page is a flag, which we can drop a pin and say, and all we do is move the page around, say what's dropped in there, and on that red spot, we can add a note and say rocks. save that. That's why we've had to go around it. And also same thing with the shovel is dropping a soil test. So we might have a look through a field and drop some pins. We can't ingest soil data in here yet. This is just an initial navigation tool. Obviously, different agronomists and growers will have different data collection tools for managing some of their soil data. So this is around more navigating to the right zones and working with a number of agronomists this year on using this as, working out where to track and trace some of this data too. If we are in a field, so to open that tray up at the bottom, if we are in a field and we want to play around with some of the legends, if we're not happy with that, basically protein, we do try and target to 1% increments. We find that a good way to view it and think about how we're going to manage it. But we had the settings cog section where we could adjust the legends in bulk in the back end, but we can also go to the legend here if we're not happy with it, push and hold, and that'll bring up an option to create a new legend there, and we can assign the new splits to that and then apply to either just that field or all fields for that year. But again, there's some other navigation training videos and tutorials for that as well. So as we go through each of the fields, just a quick snapshot on every time you select a layer, we'll have a summary of the protein, moisture, and yield that field has done for that year. So that's also in this ribbon bar up here. So big one is obviously trying to a number of different systems have access to different platforms. You can start utilizing this protein and yield data and going to that next level. So the CNH Field Ops, you can actually load in protein data as those CSVs will download it into that portal. The John Deere Operations Center won't allow the crop scan data to be ingested directly into Operations Center, which is why we pull the yield data from Operations Center and pair it with our yield here, do the analytics, and then we can push a shape file of a prescription to John Deere Operations Center as well as Field Ops. So that's because we are dealing with so many mixed fleets. That's where Engage has been a really powerful tool to really bridge some of that data flow to bring that data together, and also go to really the growers wanting to, I guess, simply assess that yield versus the protein. So to look at that yield by protein, which is, as we call the field performance maps, we go to the magnifying glass in the top left. What we'll do is then select the year. So we'll select 2024 and go confirm. We'll select the field, which for this one is BR1. We can do the correlation radius. Typically 50 meters works quite well. Depending on what crops you grow, it'll populate these different boxes here for us to adjust what each of the crop type settings we would like. Which will then step through. So each of the crops has their different requirements here. If we go down to wheat, which is down the bottom, we can either set, so P percentage means protein percentage, so we can either set that to a field average, toggle that across to just be the average of that field as we want to set the highs and the lows below that average, or we can go manual and set the set a target protein that we were gunning for. We could do the same with the yield. Typically, though, we'll do the average yield with potentially either an average protein or a fixed protein at 11.5%, 12%, or 13% in other areas plus. So you can either pick that, and then that's going to define what are we calling a high yield relative to that protein. We can then do some phosphorus removal calculations, which again, that varies on the grower and the region, ranging from around that 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms per ton of grain. Same with the potassium, so you can adjust those ones. The nitrogen and the sulfur, though, are all calculated off the protein. So nitrogen in wheat, it was worked out of 17.5%. of that protein is nitrogen and 3.5 is sulfur. So it becomes a really tight calculation there for that. And then we just go submit, and then that will go off to our servers and start crunching that data through. So generally I'll start that and then go to another field and get that going again, and that data will then log through in time once that data processing is done. So just have that filter on. I'll just turn all those layers back on. So in our bottom tray, once that data has been processed, it'll then load up our bottom tray here with more layers. So out of that processing of that field performance map, we'll get the performance map generated. So when we look at that, that gives us our 4 zones of that low yield, high protein, high yield, high protein, being the green, the high yield, low protein in the yellow, and the low yield, low protein. So find this a really good summary slide. Don't always have to make a prescription off this page. There's different approaches, whether you're using yield-driven, protein-driven prescriptions or utilizing the yield by protein, is to look at what are these different zones telling us. So generally, we'll see the green zone is what we're targeting or fertilizing for. The yellow zone potentially could have been fertilized more, had greater nitrogen availability, which would have an increase in nitrogen in those zones would have delivered a yield response. A blue zone is generally been over, had an abundance of nitrogen relative to the yield in that year. And a red zone, they can either be, and this is where we need to deep dive into the data a little more, can either be right on the cusp or on the shoulder of being a yellow zone, or it can be definitely telling us that yeah, there might be a soil constraint there or something along those lines. So usually the red zones and also the blue zones, which tell us our bucket might not have been as large, so run out of moisture relative to the other areas of the field, may have a subsoil constraint or like in those zones. So that's where we'll do a bit more investigation work. And last couple of years, it's been great working through with some growers and agronomists on working through understanding what these maps might tell us in different regions, and working through picking a couple of fields where you do a soil test in the blue zone versus the yellow zone versus maybe even the green or red. We're seeing 30 to 50 kilograms per hectare or pounds per acre of nitrogen variation quite often in the deep end. So 0 to 60 centimeter soil tests that are coming back. So that helps sort of prime that journey on where we're going on trying to find out more about what these maps can tell us and how we can then action that data in the next year. So any of these layers, like I was saying, can be created into a prescription. So to create the prescription, once you have a layer selected, like this performance map, all we need to do is go across and select the plus button on the right-hand side, and then you could select the grid or contour. Contours usually look prettier, if you know what I mean, but the grid is generally more functional. So we do really encourage people to use the grid mapping tools, because it does really start lining up with that machinery setup in the back end. So then we select a crop type. So just because I'm in a demo account, I'll work on corn, select any sort of crop type that you're growing, then select the implement like we were touching on before. So I'll go spreader and then select a product. And for the purpose of this, I'll select urea. If you've loaded A/B lines in here, you can also select an A/B line, which will help the grid or allow the grid to snap to that A/B line as another option, depending on how north, south, east, west your fence lines or A/B lines are running. That will then go off to the cloud. Generally, it takes sort of a couple of minutes to generate that map. So that'll sit down here as a darker gray map down here. So while it's dark gray, it means it's off at gone up to the cloud and is processing to render that grid map. And when it's gone light gray, it means that map has been generated and zoned up. So that's where once that's generated, if you are, again, this is where I'll typically go across to another field, do that zoning again, and then come back to these fields, and that's where the refresh button can be really helpful on that to see when that's generated there. So when that has generated, this one I've just prepared earlier, this is how the grid maps will turn out. And we'll still have those zones, and they'll be identified as they're still on the legend as these regions, as they've been identified by the different colors of those zones. To turn this management zone map as it is into a prescription, what we now need to do is come down to the layer, and you actually push and hold on the map layer you're wanting to go from a management zone to a prescription. You can then edit the layer, delete the layer, and you'll notice the export function to either John Deere in this case or to CNH will be grayed out, meaning you can't export a management zone. It's got to be a prescription. So this way we'll come in and go edit layer. Once we edit layer, we can then assign rates in these zones. So again, different people, different regions have different approaches for this. Generally, the blue zone, being the lower yield, higher protein, has generally had less export of nutrition in general from those zones, being a lower yield. So that will correlate generally with a higher soil test level for nitrogen. So that might go at a lower rate. Our target rate might be 90 kilos, which is that higher yield, higher protein, which is the field target. And then the higher yield, lower protein in the yellow zone. Again, quite often we'll see that soil test number being a bit lower and the removals being higher, being that higher yield. So we might give that a little bit more on that next year. And then the low yield, low protein, again, quite often needs a little bit more investigation, may just get a lower rate like the blue zone, or there might be, might actually need to be fed more because it's just been under fertilized in those zones. And it might be a co-deficiency. So in one of the projects we had, that ended up being low phosphorus and low nitrogen as well. So that compounded the issue. Once we generate that, we can hit save, and that will then turn that map straight away into a prescription map. So that one we just had selected has gone straight into a prescription map, which once that's generated, that will then update the legend, and you'll see the different rates that are required in each of the zones, which will then, in your reports page over here, you can then go back to that field, go to fertilizers, and that will then bring up the average rate, and then the average rate at 90.6 for the cornfield, and the total volume that is required. So that helps link together, and quite often we'll be sort of sitting side by side with a Ag World output or your farm plan around matching those rates, and we'll start with what the average rate was in there and increase and decrease in the different zones as required. An interesting one from this last year, a lot of these blue zones, depending on how the season ended in the different regions, but has correlated again well with the size of the bucket. So drought stress coming in earlier, but also can identify a frost zone. So do be aware of that on when a frost impact might have happened. It may not be soil related issue. It could be a frost related issue. But yeah, this is how we can deep dive into that data. And again, any of these layers, whether it's zone performance, so for the field performance maps, or the protein, like the raw protein or yield, can all be used for creating those maps. And also, if it is of help, again, around, you can create the removal maps can also be used. So adjusting your legend depending on your removals, set up the zones, and then create those removals from there, and that's how some people may prefer to pick up how they're replacing their nutrition from there. So some of these are generated there for you to use. Quite often, like I say, it's generally the protein map or the performance map that have been most popular for generating the prescriptions. So once we've generated those prescriptions, what next? So that's where we've got a completed map. We've got our rates assigned to these fields. We can then send that shapefile out in a couple of ways. So once we've created the map that has gone from a zone management zone map through to a completed urea or MAP or gypsum or lime map, whatever you decide, once it's created here, it will also sit in your CropScan Ag cloud portal in that management zone area. So that will be available as a shapefile in there, but we can also push and hold on this map down here. So the layer that you want, push and hold on that, and you can go export to John Deere or export to Field Ops like CNH. That will then send that data through to those platforms where you can then assign to those fields, and it will appear on your display on the terminal in your tractor if you've got that all synced up. Otherwise, it will be available as like I said, for many, say running a Marshall spreader or running a separate screen that just requires a shapefile. You can come into the file section of your CropScan Ag Cloud page, select the year, which is 2025, go into your management zones, and your urea map will be sitting in there. Select that and export. So you can either do them one at a time, or if you have a number of prescriptions in there, you can do a bulk export. They'll be all zipped up in a management zone folder and go from there. But yeah, that gives you the flexibility to be able to select those different files and download from there. They are all as a zipped shape file. So if you're using the IM4 platform for the variable rate on like the Marshall spreaders, all went in there. No worries at all for the last couple of seasons, and putting it onto other screens, as long as they can take the shape file, that will ingest into those systems. So that's a bit of a run through on the Engage side of things, and the basic navigation around stepping through, working from where that data is sitting in the raw data files right through to then creating that prescription. Like I said, it takes just a couple of minutes to generate some of those zone layers. That was the one I prepared before, or generated before. So it doesn't take too long to do that. So sitting down in front of the TV, working through, especially in season when the footy's back on, it works really well on just generating those prescriptions out from there and moving on out of there. As we come back to the CropScan side of things, as we start wrapping up from that data export through to really starting to work through some of these tips. So if we are running into any issues on this data flow, really we want to go back to the start and make sure that we've got the digital farm set up in the machinery platform. At this stage, we've got the APIs set up with CNH Field Ops as well as Operations Center. We've got the other platforms working on some of those APIs. So the access interfaces aren't always the simplest to set up, depending on the different restrictions from different companies. So we've been working through that, and also now from our back end working on having that multiple API set up so we can collect from the harvester side and push to potentially a different platform on the prescription side. But otherwise, like I said, have a think about what's going to be the simplest for your data flow. The big one as we set up the fields is when we go and try and render the maps through, we're trying to match the grower farm field. So if we know that the grower farm field in your machinery platform matches the exact same naming convention on your crop scan, makes the data flow really simply. What we want to avoid is thinking about with your paddock names or field names, how we're naming them, because once that your raw data goes into the back end and starts going to a database, how the logic is read in the naming convention can mean other things in coding language. So we really do say don't do paddock number 1 with a hash or pound sign. Write it as NO1 or whatever. So don't use the hash or pound. Avoid using a plus, the commas, and also forward slashes. So they're the ones we avoid. If you do want a slash or a space of some sort, utilizing a dash is what's best. If not, try and avoid any of those. Syncing that digital farm to all the machines and the displays before seeding is really important. So make sure that the screen that's collecting the yield data, so your in-cab monitor there, is collecting the same grower farm field name as the crop scan is really important. Again, it just streamlines it. Otherwise, that data is going to just take longer to crunch through our server and try and match GPS points to where that data's been found. Matching grower farm field is the most seamless way for us to get that data flowing through. Make sure that any new boundaries and A/B lines are updated and that sync does occur as well. Because again, retrospectively managing this is always a challenge. Again, getting organized, there's never too late to start, but the sooner you start and getting that data in order, the simpler it will be from then on. Again, for those who might have a few years worth of data, there is going to be a bit of a catch up. Sometimes there's been field changes and that sort of thing. There might be a bit of data massaging that needs to occur. Do reach out, let us know. We'll try and support where we can, or point you in the right direction for support from either your machinery dealer or other precision ag options as well. But the sooner you get that grower farm field hierarchy is generally where, and boundaries is where really most of the issues stem from. Do have a QR code here for a survey based on for those listening in on any feedback they would like or further training in different areas. Again, do go hunting for some of our shorter videos, and we've got more coming out on the snapshots of the different modules or around different steps to creating prescriptions or account setup and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, do take a photo of the QR code for some of that setup. Again, onto those resources. Generally, the YouTube page is where a lot of people default to going. So do make yourself known on that. Search CropScan Ag in YouTube or Engage YouTube, and we've got the videos on Vimeo as well, and also on our website. But generally, seeing most people default to going to the CropScan Engage channel on YouTube. There's also a QR code to get to that resources page here, so you can take a photo of that to go to there. I'll also can share the links around to the emails after this call. And on the email you did register on, thank you for the registrations, but in that email there was a data import export video embedded in that email as well. So if you've got access to that email still, you can go back and access it from there as well. So again, a link to that survey. So really appreciate anyone who's got a chance to fill that out. We do appreciate the feedback, and especially if other tools or any other functionality, other layers people want to bring in. We really want this whole system to be about you utilizing your data in the simplest way possible and try and avoid as many friction points as possible for that data flow to happen from harvest to impacting on that subsequent year. So again, if you're running your own precision ag software, like I say, SMS FarmWorks, other platforms, totally fine. We want you to be able to use that data. So do just access those raw CSV files out of your CropScan Ag portal, or those same CSV files are available off the off the hard drive of your in-cab display. So export into USB and go for it from there. We really have this as a grower focus tool for that protein and yield analysis. So this is about trying to make the system simple for you to be able to utilize. Can you go and micromanage that data further in other systems? Absolutely. But this is about taking you on the journey of saying, last year, we might not have done any variable rate. We want to build the confidence in where this data is going and what it means for us and what it could mean to even just playing around with what the different rates will be used and how that might increase or decrease our potential total requirement of fertilizers and what it might look like. It's a great starting point for that. Really, we want to support the adoption of variable rate fertilization. Overall, if we're going out to these fields are getting larger, the variability is still there. The variability, where there's variability, there's 100% opportunity. The adoption of variable rate, especially for nitrogen fertilizers, is probably only sitting around 5 to 10% across Australia, and similar numbers internationally as well. Huge opportunities there. Lime and gypsum has been a stronger adoption. And again, we can make all those maps in our system. We're not restricted to only doing fertilizers. And the big one is we've tried to make this intuitive of farmer feedback on trying to keep the steps simple. A number of other systems, again, when you're only using this for short bursts, quite often when you're making prescriptions, short bursts at the start of the season, we want you to be getting more friendlier with this app, that we can use it at harvest, use it through the season, and start building this data confidence in your data management. So we are open to feedback, and really the feedback and the onboarding of more users and licenses essentially enables us to continue that system to grow and provide the tools back to you to help you utilize your data better. So we're only as good as the feedback that we get. We'll try and action that and build that. But overall, it's been a great community working with all the CropScan users, and do reach out. Social media has been a great one as well for peer-to-peer learning around what to do around the decision around rates and management options. And there are other videos where I've sort of unpacked the theory around that yield and protein, and do find those previous webinars online around some of that theory of that yield protein relationship, what it might mean as that starting point for how much do I vary those rates of nitrogen fertilizer, or start looking for where other nutrients may be limiting the system. We can start unpacking that a little bit more, but always an open ear to feedback, and all users and growers learn from each other significantly. So really do utilize that network. But really appreciate you tuning in here today.